One day, 4 men arrived at the royal court of King Harun and accused a woman named Aisha of committing a heinous and despicable act. They claimed that this woman had engaged in an indecent act with a dog to satisfy her desires. Upon hearing this, King Harun was furious and immediately summoned Aisha to the court. When she arrived, she vehemently denied all the accusations, stating, "Your Majesty, I have not given myself to any man for the past 2 years." The king then ordered the royal midwife to examine her to verify the truth of her claims. The midwife lowered her gaze and prepared to conduct the examination. As soon as she began, Aisha became restless and started screaming, "What are you doing to me?" The midwife firmly held her and said, "This is absolutely necessary to prove your innocence." Aisha lowered her head and swore, "By Allah, these accusations are false. I have done no such thing." However, the midwife paid no heed to her words and continued the examination. After a while, the midwife noticed some unusual marks on Aisha's body and exclaimed, "Your Majesty, this woman is lying. Her body bears signs that suggest she has been involved in an illicit relationship with an animal." Hearing this, the entire court erupted in chaos. King Harun's face showed a mix of deep thought and anger. He scrutinized Aisha from head to toe and asked again, "Are these accusations true? Why were you hiding the truth from us?" Aisha once again insisted, "Your Majesty, I am not lying. These accusations are false." The king took a deep breath and said, "If everything is false, then why are you so afraid? Why can't you look me in the eye and speak?" Aisha replied, "The marks on my body are actually—" Before she could finish, the entire court fell silent. The king demanded, "Tell me the truth. How did these marks come to be?" Aisha replied, "The person who brought me here is responsible for this, and he is present in this court right now." As soon as these words were spoken, the court was thrown into turmoil once again. Everyone's eyes turned to the man she had accused. People began glancing at each other nervously. The king, now enraged, immediately summoned the 4 men who had brought the accusations against Aisha. When they were brought before the court, none of them could meet the king's gaze. Fear was evident in their eyes. King Harun observed each of them carefully and asked, "Did you falsely accuse this woman?" For a moment they all remained silent. Suddenly one of them spoke up, "Your Majesty, we have done no wrong. We heard about this accusation from another person." The king, now even more furious, shouted, "And you dare to accuse a woman of such a grave crime without any evidence or investigation? Tell me, who is this person who informed you?" The men exchanged nervous glances but remained silent. The king's angry eyes made it clear that he would not spare them unless they revealed the truth. Finally they were forced to confess. One of them mustered the courage to say, "Your Majesty, that person is present in this court, but we do not know him. We only know that he is connected to Aisha's life." Upon hearing this, the king roared, "Bring that person before me immediately." Shortly after, the doors of the court opened, and the accused man was brought in. His face was pale with fear, and he could barely muster the courage to step into the court. The king, in a furious tone, demanded, "Are you the one responsible for this?" The court fell silent once again. The man replied, "Your Majesty, this is false. I have done no such thing." The fire of anger still burned in the king's eyes. He said, "If you are innocent, then why are you so afraid? Why can't you speak clearly?" Hearing this, the man fell silent. Everyone in the court waited in astonishment for the king's verdict. The king announced once again, "We will investigate this matter thoroughly and justice will be served. The truth will be uncovered, and if these accusations are proven false, the accusers will not be spared." These words caused another uproar in the court. Everyone was eager to see how the matter would unfold. Those who had initially praised the king and cheered for his decisions now sat in silence as the situation had become deeply mysterious. Everyone waited with bated breath for the final judgment. After a while, the king ordered Aisha to be brought back to the court. She was immediately presented before the king. The king's gaze fell upon her. She was now wrapped in a white cloth, her face completely covered, revealing only her eyes. She stood silently before the king. As soon as she entered the court, chaos erupted once again. People began making all sorts of accusations against her. When the king observed her closely, he was astonished. How could such a modest, veiled woman commit such a grave sin? The king addressed her again. "Listen, you have been accused of engaging in an illicit relationship with an animal. I ask you again, is this true? These 4 men claim that you are a prostitute. Have you forgotten that such relationships are forbidden in our laws? Anyone who commits such a crime, whether man or woman, is sentenced to 10 years in prison. Do you not know the punishment for adultery?" Hearing this, Aisha burst into tears. The king was puzzled by her strange behavior. He couldn't understand why she was crying instead of answering. He watched her for a while, but her tears did not stop. Then, he called the royal midwife again and ordered her to conduct a more thorough examination of Aisha to determine the truth. Shortly after, the royal midwife arrived in the court. The king explained everything to her, and Aisha was taken inside the palace chambers for a more detailed examination. Everyone in the court waited anxiously for the midwife's report. The king turned his attention to the 4 men, who stood silently with their heads bowed. After some time, the midwife came running out of the chambers, screaming. Her cries startled everyone in the court. Even the king rose from his throne. The midwife seemed to be on the verge of revealing a shocking truth, but she hesitated to speak in front of so many people. The king gestured for her to be silent and ordered her to go inside the chambers. He himself followed her into the palace. The court erupted in chaos once again. Some continued to make wild accusations against Aisha, while others began to defend her. After a while, the king emerged from the chambers. His expression made it clear that the situation had taken a dramatic turn. Behind him, Aisha, still wrapped in the white cloth, stepped out. The king glared at the 4 men and said, "All of you except one may leave the court. You will be summoned later." The 3 men exchanged fearful glances and left the court. The king then addressed the remaining man. "You claim that there is a dog in this woman's house and that you saw it with your own eyes. Tell me, what is the color of the dog?" Hearing this, the man fell silent. Everyone in the court turned their attention to the man. He fidgeted nervously, his eyes darting around the room, searching for a way out. The king's sharp gaze bore into him, and the tension in the court was unbearable. "Speak," the king commanded. "What is the color of the dog?" The man swallowed hard before stammering, "Your Majesty, the dog is brown." A heavy silence filled the court. The king nodded slowly as if in deep thought. Then he turned to the second man and asked the same question. "The dog is black," the second man replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Gasps spread through the court. The king turned to the third man. "The dog is white," he answered, avoiding the king's gaze. By now, murmurs filled the room. Everyone could see what was happening. Finally, the fourth man was asked, and he confidently said, "The dog is red." At this, the entire court erupted in disbelief. The king slammed his fist onto his throne. "You fools! Each of you has given a different answer. Do you take me for a fool?" The 4 men looked at each other in horror, realizing that their lies had been exposed. "Bring the dog," the king commanded. Within moments, the soldiers entered the court, dragging in the animal. The entire court craned their necks to see. The dog stood there, its fur a mixture of different shades, brown, black, white, and hints of red. The moment the 4 men saw it, they visibly paled. Whispers spread among the audience as the truth became clear to all. "You claim to have seen this dog with your own eyes," the king said coldly. "And yet, not one of you could describe it correctly." The men trembled before the king, their confidence shattered. The king turned to Aisha, who stood quietly, her eyes filled with both relief and sorrow. "Tell me, Aisha," the king said, his voice softer now. "If you have done nothing wrong, why do these men wish to ruin you?" Aisha took a deep breath, her voice steady but filled with pain. "Your Majesty, I have harmed no one. I live quietly in my home. I do not meet men, nor do I speak to them unnecessarily. I do not understand why these people insist on dishonoring me." She wiped a tear from her cheek before continuing. "After my husband died, I was left alone. I had no family, no support, no protector. Yet, I remained devoted to Allah and stayed within the boundaries of my faith. But there are those in this world who do not let widows live in peace." She turned her eyes toward the 4 men. "These men, they are among those people." The king's gaze darkened. "Explain yourself." Aisha nodded. "When my husband was alive, I never stepped outside unnecessarily. He provided for me while I cared for our home. But after he passed away from an illness, I had no choice but to manage everything alone. One day I was returning home when I saw a wounded puppy lying on the road. It was helpless and there was no water nearby. Seeing its suffering, I picked it up and took it home." She glanced at the dog, who sat quietly in the court, unaware of the accusations thrown against it. "I nursed the puppy back to health, gave it food and water. It became attached to me, and since I had no one else, it brought me a small comfort. It never left the house, nor did it cause harm." The king listened intently, his expression unreadable. "Then," Aisha continued, "these men began harassing me. Whenever I went out, they stood at the street corners making vile remarks. They followed me home. I ignored them, hoping they would stop. But one day, one of them had the audacity to knock on my door. Gasps filled the room. He said he wanted to spend the night with me. The king's hands clenched into fists. I refused, of course, she said bitterly. I told him I was not running a brothel. That angered them. The next morning, another man came with the same disgusting offer. He claimed to be in love with me and promised me wealth if I agreed to his desires. I told him that if he truly loved me, he should marry me. But he laughed and said he already had 4 wives and didn't want another. The court was deathly silent. Aisha continued, "From that day on, they made my life miserable. They spread rumors calling me disgraceful names. People in the village turned against me. Then one day they heard my dog bark. That's when they came up with this wicked idea, to falsely accuse me so that I would be cast out or worse, punished for a crime I did not commit." She turned to the king, tears in her eyes. "Your Majesty, my only crime is that I refuse to be dishonored." The king rose from his throne. His gaze swept over the 4 men who now shook with fear. "You have falsely accused an innocent woman, attempted to destroy her reputation and spread lies. In our land, such crimes do not go unpunished." The men fell to their knees. "Your Majesty, forgive us," they pleaded. "We were blinded by our desires. We made a mistake." The king's voice thundered across the court. "A mistake? You tried to ruin a woman's life out of vengeance. You have no remorse for your actions, only for being caught." He turned to his soldiers. "Take these men away. Their punishment will be severe." The guards seized them, dragging them toward the exit. The men screamed, begging for mercy. But the king had made his decision. He then turned to Aisha. "You are free from these false accusations. You have suffered greatly, but today justice has been served." The court erupted in cheers, celebrating the triumph of truth over lies. The 4 men were sentenced to death for their crime, a warning to all who would dare commit such evil. And as for Aisha, the king made sure she was never harassed again. He arranged for a respectable home and financial security for her, ensuring that she could live in peace. As she left the court, her loyal dog trotting beside her, Aisha finally felt safe again. Justice had prevailed. Thanks for watching. Please endeavor to subscribe for more.